Hello. Welcome back to the Samara Dental Business Guide podcast, and this is Aaron Maher. And today I'm talking with Nigel Crossman, our commercial finance head, about private practice. What's been going on in the market, especially since lockdown. So, Nigel, from your perspective, what's happened in private practice overall, I suppose, or the general trend that you've seen anyway?
Right, morning, Aaron, and morning, everybody. What's tend to happen is that the private practices have done well since the reopening after the first lockdown. Obviously, there was a slow take up of work as people came back to the dentist. There were those who came back, so they were obviously in pain. A lot of people didn't want to book appointments initially. But what we're finding, the trend we're finding, especially with management information showing the income since lockdown, is that private practices are starting to really overperform. So that's down to a lot of reasons. One of the reasons being that they can obviously see almost the same number of clients they saw previously. That's the first thing, because they don't have a lot of downtime. They have more time between patients anyway. And in many cases, a lot of private practices weren't working at 400%. So they had spare chair capacity anyway.
Yeah.
And where a practice has got one or two, well, probably two surgeries, they can rotate the chairs. We're also finding that private practices have been quicker to put in things like air filtration systems and ventilation. And that, of course, has helped with the downtime as well. I suppose most importantly, what's happened here is that the NHS people obviously have only been seeing emergency people, and they might have been doing a few appointments on the side of that for reviews, but they're seeing nowhere near the number that they were seeing in the previous year. Now, people still need to see the dentist, so a proportion of those people have moved quite swiftly over to private practice. And then, so this has helped boost the income of a lot of private practices. And one of the big problems is getting this across to the lenders, because they're not particularly close to the sectors.
Sure.
We're very close to the sector. Samita, your wife owns some practices, so I get a lot of information from that.
Yeah.
And obviously from our clients, we get a lot of information.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the lenders, you will see this in the accounts, how they're reflected maybe 6 to 12 months down the line. I guess that's when they'll see it. Okay, and I suppose it's important that the lenders are aware that there is a demand in the private sector from patients, and there's also demand from dentists wanting to do private, because, as you quite clearly said, there's the uncertainty of the NHS. Okay, so people are trying to think, okay, I'm going to move further into the private sector and offer private services. What we're seeing as a result of that is more, as we said on previous podcasts, that people are starting up squats or turning their NHS biased practices into more private, and we're seeing more competition out there. So there's the demand for marketing dental services privately is growing because patients want these types of things. So, as you said, Nigel, I think I've seen in my wife's clinic, Smita's a neem tree. The demand is very, very strong. Okay. It was strong before COVID. It's just as strong now, primarily because, as you said, people want to get their dental health sorted out, and they're sitting at home. They've got money in their pockets. Certain people have. They can't spend it on holidays. They can only spend it on a few items. Okay. Maybe their oral health, maybe some furniture, or doing something to their house. Now, will this continue post lockdown? I think to some extent it will. I think it's still going to be strong. And personally, I think if I was a betting man, I'd bet on the private sector as an investor, as opposed to the NHS sector, because there's too many unknowns in my mind. But that's just me, and perhaps I'm biased, but that's how I see it. Do you agree or not?
Yeah, I do agree. I think there are a lot of things that have changed in the last few years. People were drifting more towards private practice anyway. There was a general drift towards private, as there is in most things. This COVID thing has accelerated that. You've then got the additional thing of next year, with targets being set at NHS practices at 45% UDAs, which is going to, I mean, that's less than half of what they were doing previously. So again, you've got half the number of appointments in effect in the wind, and the only alternative is to go private, because you're not going to find another NHS dentist. one of the issues lending wise, funny enough, is yes, we're clearly seeing in management information, we're clearly seeing an uplift in income
Yeah.
on practices. And as always, with lenders, especially the main banks, it's a bit of a double-edged sword because their first thought when they see increased turnover is suspicion. And can this be maintained? Why has this happened?
Yeah.
What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? So it's a question of reassuring some of these lenders that we're close to it. We know what's happening.
Mm.
We can see what's happening, and it will continue for quite a while. Yes, it's sustainable because the NHS service is not going to be there for them in the future, but in the near future and possibly far future.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
private practices are doing well. People are more aware of oral hygiene. People want to look nicer. You can just tell that even over the last 5 years, with the growth of Invisalign,
Yeah.
that is mushroomed into such a
Oh,
monster
it's huge.
work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you said, COVID has exacerbated it. People are on Zoom all the time talking. People want to look presentable and good and want straight teeth. And eventually we will get out of this Zoom loop and be outside meeting people. And they've got money in their pocket. They want to spend it
Yeah.
on themselves. So I think that's been a real kind of catapult for the private dental sector. So if you were kind of advising people on dentistry now, someone who's got ambitions to having their own clinic or buying a clinic, and what would you say to them in this instance, especially with the booming or growth in private?
Yeah, I don't think the indications we give has changed that much because if you were buying a practice that was 50% NHS or 50% private, I mean the fact is that it's very hard to grow that NHS side. You're not
Mm,
going to grow it. Your contract's going to be the same every year unless you
sure.
get another contract from anywhere, which is unusual. The development and the growth side was the private side. So whilst a lot of people still like to have that security of a little bit of income that's coming in every month from the NHS, it's about looking at the size of the contract, I think, and making sure it's not too big, and
Yeah.
making sure that there are plenty of practices out there to buy that can be developed.
Yeah.
We see a lot of private practices that have been open 2 or 3 years that are struggling because they weren't opened correctly,
Yep.
perhaps in the right format, and they weren't done correctly, which is a shame. So they're for sale. But also there are a lot of practices for sale where people still don't have websites. They still don't do any marketing.
Yeah.
Lifestyle businesses where people are happy to earn the money they've been earning rather than grow the business. So there are
Mm,
plenty of things out there. And yes, I think the growth in private will continue because people, I was born in the 50s and people had uh, silver fillings.
mm,
That's everybody had them. To go to a private dentist, you had to be wealthy.
yeah.
That's not the case now.
It's changed.
Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's changed dramatically. And the whole dentistry has changed dramatically, and white fillings are so common now, even in NHS dentists,
Mm,
where they will upsell in effect
sure.
to a white filling from a silver filling, um, and that makes a big difference. And so, generally, as you said, people are drifting towards looking nice. It's the film style look.
Mm,
You want to look like they're, they're role models,
correct. Yeah.
and they have got, and as you quite rightly say, a lot of people have got money in their pocket because at the moment in lockdown, let's be honest, you can't go out, you can't do anything,
Yeah.
apart from order from Amazon, and,
Yeah.
and that's it really.
But
And there's nothing else to do with your money,
correct. And
so
I think
you
you've
might as well
hit,
do it.
yeah, absolutely. You hit a really important point there. Also, I think also the culture of people have moved on since over the last 10 years. So as a result of Amazon and the likes, people want things not in 3 weeks' time, they want it now. Okay. So they're not going to wait to go to an NHS clinic. They will say, oh, I'll go on Google, they'll find a clinic, I can get an appointment tomorrow, they're done. Okay. So it's convenience is a huge aspect here. And I think that's where NHS clinics have perhaps not really considered that in their mix of how they offer services. People want instant gratification as Amazon does in terms of buying things, but in the dental context, people want convenience. They want to get to be able to see their dentist tomorrow or the next day or on a Sunday or on an evening. Do NHS clinics offer that? Some do, but very many don't. Okay. And I think that's where the culture has to change out there in the sector to embrace this. And I know many clinics do now, private clinics are doing these things. They're building their businesses around the patient as opposed to building it around what the NHS says or as opposed to what the dentists want. You've got to build your business around what the patient demands are and serve them that way. So yeah, it's an interesting time. And I'm a believer that patients will dictate how dentistry is offered, okay, or demanded, and patients have the power, whether you like it or not, really, okay. Therefore, you need to be able to satisfy the patient needs. That's my view.
I think it's very true. I think life has just changed.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, at my age, I would never have dreamt that I'd be ordering all my stuff that I need off Amazon.
Correct.
And I wouldn't have believed that, you know, department stores would no longer exist.
Yeah.
And they don't really. They're all going out of business. And it's interesting that the people buying these retail stores that are struggling are all online companies.
They're all online, and they don't want the premises, do they?
No, they don't want the premises, which is going to free up. Not very helpful for squat practices, unfortunately, because you really don't want to take the lease on a Debenhams building.
Yeah.
You know, it might be a bit big for a squat practice.
Sure.
But some of these smaller units, I mean, unfortunately, most clothes shops are too big, but there are still smaller units, and there'll be a knock-on effect because as the high streets crumble, in effect, and they have done for years with hypermarkets and retail parks and everything else, they've all contributed to it. Slowly but surely, you will have service industries in high streets.
Correct.
And that's what we are seeing. We're seeing service industries, people you have to go to, like tile shops. If you want to look at the colour of a tile in person, you've got to go there.
Yeah.
If you want your ears pierced, you've got to go with your ears pierced.
Sure.
Like, you know, shoes mended, that sort of thing. You can't do that sort of thing. And dentistry, obviously, is one of the main ones you cannot have done in your own home.
Correct.
You've got to go to the dentist, like you have to go to the doctors. And so I think the high streets will turn very much into service areas with cafes and things that people want to do for relaxation rather than shopping.
100% agree with you. You know, as you said, we saw this pre-COVID, but now I think it's just accelerated as a result of it, and hence I suppose we're getting and a relaxation in the planning laws, as we mentioned previously, has just exacerbated this point where you find a high street, you find an empty unit, you can put a dental practice there 9 times out of 10 now, that there won't be really any issues. So it's an exciting time in the private sector, personally, I believe. I think one point Nigel mentioned earlier where there are private practices for sale that haven't done very well. Okay, and that's a really important point as well. If I look back at clinics that have struggled, the ones that have struggled really haven't either got the location right, or they didn't really understand marketing, or they haven't really invested in the marketing side of things, which is paramount in today's competitive marketplace. And they haven't really designed. They've built a clinic that's kind of built around them, that looks lovely and it looks beautiful, but really doesn't get the patients through the door because they haven't invested in that. They spend too much money on kitting out with all the latest gizmos, but quite often or not, they've run out of money to actually do the marketing, which is ultimately what brings in the customers. Okay, so private sector in a nutshell, exciting, but tread carefully and remember, I suppose the most important thing, if you're going down that private route, stand out, be different. That's the really key thing. You've got to stand out and be different in this marketplace. Otherwise, you'll struggle. Okay, Nigel, thank you today. Talking about the private sector. Any last comments you want to say? Or
I think I would just reiterate what you said there, Aaron, that when if you're looking at doing a squat practice or even buying a small practice, you've got to look at your costs very, very carefully. And we talked about it on boot camp, and I'd recommend to anybody who's thinking of doing this to come to one of the boot camps because they'll get a huge amount of information. But I talked on there, and I talked about, you know, when you're looking at your costings, there is what you want, what you actually need, and then what you can afford. And hopefully, you need and afford come in line together. But you know, if you can't want everything in your surgery on day one.
Mm,
not unless you have got lots and lots of cash. And
totally.
and it's those clinics that have suffered because they haven't been set up correctly or haven't taken the correct advice. And I say this to a lot of people when we go back to them on the first lot of projections. They come on the phone and they go, "Why have you done this and why have you done that?" And I think, well, because we're being careful, we're being prudent, we're being sensible. This is what a bank would do to your costings. So you've got to look at it very carefully. And we don't we have a nice conversation. Eventually, people see that we're talking sense, and it brings the cost down. And so people have got to just be careful, be realistic and sensible on your costings, and talk to people who know what they're doing.
Sure.
That is just so important. That affects solicitors, accountants, everybody.
Yeah, totally, totally. Well, thanks, Nigel. Okay, we could probably talk for another half an hour on this subject, but I think we've kind of encapsulated it well in these 15 minutes. Okay, so thanks a lot, and everybody check out our podcast and look out for the next one that's coming soon. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.